Okay. Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of another Diamond Jukebox. Today, my guest is the creator and host of the Appetite for Distortion podcast, Brandon Weissler.
Hi, how are you, Maria?
Hi, Brandon. I'm good. How are you?
Um, I'm here with an almost 2-year-old, so I think it's kind of self-explanatory. So we'll see what's to come for this interview. I don't know if you've ever interviewed a baby before.
No, I haven't actually. No, I have not.
Well, slowly but surely during the Appetite for Distortion podcast that you mentioned, he's been joining episodes because I do the show from home right now. I used to do it from a radio station where I work, iHeartRadio in New York City. And also when I first started it, it was on Long Island at WBAB when I was doing a rock station out there as an on-air personality. And I can't believe I've been doing it since Guns N' Roses reunited since 2016.
Oh,
But back then I was single and doing it on a radio station. Now I'm doing it at home with the child, so it's been a fun ride.
I bet it was. So Guns N' Roses, you were reunited in 2016, huh?
Well, at least it depends on how you want to define reunited. Depends on how big of a fan. So, Axl and Slash reunited along with Duff McKagan, the big three from the classic lineup. It had been Axl and for lack of a better word, variety of members for quite some time since that classic lineup broke up in the late '90s. So it was a big deal for someone like me. I'm 41. I was too young to have seen them when they were together, so I never had an opportunity to see Axl and Slash on stage. And just as a fan, that was cool. But being in radio, a friend of mine also in radio, and also a Guns N' Roses fan. He said we should do a Guns N' Roses podcast. I'm like, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Like, why am I going to talk about how much I love November Rain for like an hour at a time? What's they're my favorite band, but to do a podcast about it, well, to his credit, my friend Ian, he's still current friend, former co-host.
Uh-huh.
He just was well versed in the podcast world, and I really didn't understand it. It's changed a lot, as you know, in the past decade, and I was still new to it. I was still very much team radio, and I still am as far as like the actual radio. But seeing what you can do with podcasting, and all these years later, using this as a platform to interview some of my favorite rock stars and celebrities and talk to fans all across the world who not only care about Guns N' Roses, but for some reason care about me and they love when I his name is Harrison, but Baby Brownstone is his radio name. So they love Baby Brownstone as well. Right? Yeah? Is that funny? He's a little man bun right now, if you're watching.
Yeah, I can see the man bun. I can definitely see it.
His hair is so long. It's like a young Axel. But I don't want him to cut it yet. My wife and I, we don't want him to cut it. We love it. It's so rock and roll.
Well, you should definitely keep it rock and roll.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, raise him the right way. I played, you know, Guns N' Roses and a lot of other bands. I don't know if they partnered with but there's a whole lullaby like CD collection for Guns N' Roses and Van Halen, and playing that for him too is very cute.
Really? Wow. Yeah, I should look it up. Yeah, I never knew that there was a lullaby collection. So basically, it's a bunch of lullabies sung by rock bands.
Yeah, it's what sounds like you would hear in a music box,
Mhm.
like an actual lullaby. Like there's no lyrics or anything.
Uh-huh.
And actually, it's funny. My wife who's a huge Dave Matthews fan. There's Dave Matthews version out there. Hold on, he sees my wife, so maybe we can get a little break from him. There we go, buddy. So we both had fun guessing when we put on Lullaby Dave Matthews or Lullaby GNR to see if we can guess it through whatever, kid instruments that are being played. So things like that are what I've incorporated into this podcast, and
Mhm.
it made it interesting for me because I was, as I mentioned before, I thought it was a silly idea, but to get to interview people, to interview fans across literally the world who speak English as a second language, who want to come on my podcast and talk about Guns N' Roses has been great. But just also to I don't know, influence or kind of bring along a new generation and to have that be part of the show. Not like that was the plan, but it's been a none of this was part of the plan, I guess you could say.
Hmm. I see. So you mentioned that podcasting has changed a lot since 2016, which is when you started Appetite for Distortion. How has it changed exactly?
I think it's just become more accepted in the mainstream media, or I guess people like me just thought it was for I don't know, it was too open. Even though I came up with the internet, it's just so funny. Even though I think technically I would classify as a millennial, but I'm not because I remember a world without the internet, and but still there's a part of me that's like okay, very old school and didn't understand podcasting, where it just seems like fringe people were doing it. It wasn't anything to be taken seriously, but now they're actually, as we're recording this, iHeartRadio is putting on their podcast awards. So it's become very mainstream and very accepted. And you see traditional radio stations kind of enforcing or promoting their own podcasts and just the creativity that anybody can, that it comes along. Anybody, it just opens it up really to the world where anybody can interview anybody. It's not just a select group anymore, and it's very cool where people like you and me can do it from the comfort of our own home. I assume that's your home, uh, and have an almost 2 year old be your co-host. So in the past that wasn't possible. So even with that, podcasting, really an audio based uh, medium, really has embraced the visual aspect since COVID. So really since 2020, because when I started, it was not video. I radio behind the mic, don't see me. So this is all I'm still adjusting to having my face seen all the time. I grew up just being behind the mic and people guessing what I look like.
I see. Yeah. I have seen quite a few interviews of my favorite bands, and plenty of them have been, recorded on video. And even if it's just someone sitting in a studio, like there's still video footage of them like talking. So yeah, like it's definitely pretty interesting how you said that it wasn't even like available back in 2016. So, and yeah, like I also know that it was technically like 9 years ago, almost a decade ago at this point. But honestly, 2016 feels like just like 5 seconds ago to me.
Yeah, it's one of those that it's a while ago, but at the same time, it really is, it's recent. So we've come a long way in not that long of a time.
Mhm.
So it's really interesting to see what's to come because this was not my plan. I didn't know how far this was going to go. My my friend who I started this with, Ian, after like the 39th episode and after Guns N' Roses came through our area, we saw them in concert, and he's like, I don't want to, where are we going to go with this? And I made a decision. I had the experience of being on different radio stations, primarily classic rock, and experiencing that kind of expression and not getting what I got out of podcasting. And it's just saying like, okay, I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know who I'm going to get the interview. If anybody's going to listen, if I'll ever make any money off this or whatever, something is here and I'm enjoying it. I was enjoying it. So it was cool. In that very first episode I did by myself, I interviewed a then 15-year-old London Hudson, who's Slash's son,
Oh,
who's a musician in a band, and I had to get approval from Slash. Not directly. I have never spoken to the Slash, but to get his son and to have, that interview make that was one of the early interviews I've had make rock news outlets, which has been really gratifying to be like, okay, they're actual people and not just a select group of nerdy Guns N' Roses fans. No offense to us, not, nerdy Guns N' Roses fans. I'm one of you, but to see that it kind of casts a wider net, that has been really rewarding. Because if it was just again me talking about my favorite song, I'd get bored. I don't want to hear that. So I use a loose, fun term of a 6 degrees of GNR bacon. If you're familiar with that Kevin Bacon game, the 6 degrees of separation
I'm
thing.
not.
So the actor Kevin Bacon is a game called 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, where you can name any actor or actress, and you could get back to Kevin Bacon in 6 moves or less. It's also called 6 Degrees of Separation. So it's like whatever connection I can make Guns N' Roses to, no matter how thin, whether, of course, if you're in the band or you used to be in the band, I'm not counting that. But if you saw them once, if you had an opinion, if you happened to meet one of them, you went to high school with them, you ran into them in an elevator, you worked with them on a TV show, or just like some sort of connection that gets me to talk to you about other stuff in addition to that connection, has allowed me to do almost 500 episodes.
Hmm. Yeah, and that actually brings me to my first question for you. So,
First question. Oh, wow. Okay. We were just getting warmed up.
yeah, I mean, honestly, I haven't, we've already been talking for like what, 10 minutes, and I haven't even started asking you questions yet. But honestly, even like before I asked that, so you said that Slash's son, who was then 15 years old, was the very first guest on your podcast.
No, he was the first guest that I did solo. I probably my wording wasn't great.
Hmm.
Of course, my wording isn't great for somebody who's been in radio for 20 plus years, and again, this podcast for 8 or whatever it is now. Um, the first one I did solo because again, I started the podcast with my friend Ian, so it
Hmm.
was just Appetite for Distortion with Brando and Scotto, and our first guest because the first one we did was just us talking about the pending reunion and talk and hyping it up, and I think we got a friend of ours for the second one, and Axel joining ACDC. But the first guest we got, which again, it wasn't like anyone bit. Well, I shouldn't say again because I didn't say anything first. He wasn't anyone major, but Anthony Boza, who wrote Slash's co-wrote Slash's autobiography and Tommy Lee's. He's an accomplished author, Eminem's. That he was willing to just come on our podcast, so we really didn't have much of a listener base yet. It was very kind. So it was kind of a good launching pad for us. That I think episode 9, excuse me, we got it's certain numbers stick out. It's I usually I have to remind myself before recording every episode what number it is, but there are certain numbers that stick out. 9 was Charlie Benanti from Anthrax, and we did that through Twitter. So that really also showed me something else too, that we have the power. We don't have to rely on anyone but ourselves to make this happen. So not to say everything is always how I still get certain interviews through social media, but a lot of them, of course, come through labels or connections through my job. But just to see that early on for somebody who hadn't really done anything yet was cool. And the first what I consider great experience that said, okay, we have something, was episode 20. When we set it up through Twitter, was Dave Kushner from Velvet Revolver. And that was my first time ever just seeing that an interview of mine could be picked up by an outlet
Oh, wow.
that other people can read. So I'm like, again, I'm not just talking. Who's going to listen to this other than a few Guns N' Roses fans? So that really showed me the exposure that podcasts get and the time that and respect that it can get. And I was late on it. I still feel like I'm late on it. I'm still catching up a bit, but yeah, still to this day, lucky enough to be routinely quoted by a lot of the major outlets like Ultimate Classic Rock, Loudwire, etc. But yeah, that's so that when I said episode 40, that was because I really didn't think I would do this on my own. You know, I liked having a son now to bounce off of. This was something. Yeah, I started out in radio, but I'm a very naturally shy person, which is why I like the behind the scenes of it. And this still takes a lot for me to do this and to be on camera. I kind of have to psych myself. So once used the analogy. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Weekend at Bernie's.
I am. I've never
Okay,
heard of it, and I
but
know what it's about.
as long as you know what it's about. But that's how she described it because she was shy off the stage, but really on the stage was a different person. And I'm like, how do you do that? Why are you so shy? I find that surprising. She's like, I'm like a Weekend at Bernie's. You have to like prop me up to get up there, and I can start doing my thing. So it's also a lot of self prop. to do that, and of course not being literal with it all. So yeah, it's I of course have gotten better with it over time, all these years into it, because I've never had this much airtime ever on terrestrial radio and FM. Because even on a morning show, you don't have this much time. So there's a lot of airtime, and hopefully I've gotten better over the years. And some people have stuck with me, and lucky enough to still be making new fans, who people who find me. So it just says that there's a lot more to do, a lot more people to talk to.
I see. Okay, and like honestly, it brings me to my very first question about for you, which we haven't even gotten to until now. So, how exactly did you? Can you tell me the whole story about how you created Appetite for Distortion and how you got to where you are today?
Sure, a little of that was in our, our conversation leading up to the first question, but I mean, I still am working at iHeartRadio. I work for a division called Premier Radio Networks. I do a variety of things there, working on different, whether it's syndicated shows or live broadcasts. You know, primarily I would go in the studio, but since COVID, I've been able to stay home, and I have a physical disability, so it's really good that I stay home. And now that I have a young son, so while a lot of people go back, I'm allowed to stay here and work from here. But there are times I go in to, board up, work the radio board, or again, live events. I went in recently for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame broadcast. So it's just me working the radio board, making sure that Cher doesn't curse too much, and making sure it goes out to all of our iHeart stations, whoever signed up for it. It's not as glamorous as it seems, but it's a cool experience. Things to do like that. You're stuck in a studio with a bunch of people, and yeah. So I mean, I do things. I work on Keith Sweat, the R&B singer, his radio show. So I do things like that, and just when I first started at iHeart, I'm just sitting there one day, as you do, editing audio, and my friend Ian, who I had worked at SiriusXM for about a year. For the there's a whole. It's hard to get through one question, Maria, because there's always like it's a big. There's always a lot of bullet points to each one. I worked for SiriusXM for a year. Oddly enough, I worked for the Catholic channel, even though I'm Jewish. But radio is radio. I'm not a religious person anyway, but it's just funny that an interesting thing that I worked for the Catholic channel at Sirius. I just want to make it seem like I wasn't like a big time person there, because I wasn't. But I met some cool people, and one of which was this kid Ian, who worked at on the political talk side, and we once through a mutual friend at Sirius, we went to go see Guns N' Roses, and it was the band that probably was least associated with. I don't even know. It was probably, I don't know, 12, 13, maybe 2012, maybe 10. I don't know. It just basically was with Axl. Unless you don't know anything about Guns N' Roses, it's Axl Rose and a lot of other people. If for those who do know, DJ Ashba and was in the band. It was a DJ Ashba era, and we met there. We had a good time, and we met over just bonding over radio and Guns N' Roses. And one day he texts me, we should do a podcast on Guns N' Roses. And I said, that's a stupid idea. What am I going to talk about? November Rain, maybe my favorite song, for an hour. And he's like, no, once we get interviews. I'm like, who's going to do interviews with us? I understand we work in radio, but we're not anybody of significance. I have the opposite of people in my line of work. I have the anti-ego, where it's probably detrimental, where I just think I'm not, I don't have anything. Like I don't have, I'm not worthy of this or accomplished, people. But there are people in my position who just think they walk on water, because I just so badly don't want to be that. Maybe I've gone too far at the other end. Like, who's gonna listen to us? He's like, trust me. And at the time, he was working on a political podcast, which he is now. It's just a different one, and he was making some money off it. And that made it seem real. I'm like, all right, this is a real person. My friend, he's not trying to pitch me anything. We're just going in it together just to try talk about Guns N' Roses recording, where I work, I have access to this equipment. Let's do it. And we started out on Long Island because at the time I was working for 1023 WBAB, a rock station out there, and he lives out on Long Island, and we were able to just get together every so often and start doing episodes, and somehow stumbled into this Guns N' Roses community, which I had always kind of been peripheral on the side of it, on the outside, because I'm a fan. You know, when you go to fan sites and things like that, and it's just really grown since then. So that's kind of how. Oh, and I said when we came up with the name, I came up. I just want to make sure it's clear. I came up with Appetite for Distortion.
I
He
see.
wanted Appetite for Discussion, but I'm like, that's a little corny. And I'm glad we didn't do Appetite for Discussion because there is something online that exists that's called that. That's a kind of like a GNR library, like online library. So I just want to. I came up with because it's the greatest name for a podcast that Rachel Bolan from Skid Row has ever heard in his life. That's what he. I have that on tape. It says it on my website. So I just want to make sure I take credit for the name. As much as I downplay myself, I have to give credit where credit is due.
Well, you definitely have to give credit where credit is due.
Yeah.
And okay, I think you just mentioned it, but can you tell me what exactly does Appetite for Distortion refer to? Is it a Guns N' Roses song or um,
Sure. Well, Appetite for Destruction is their debut album
mhm,
from 1987, one of their the greatest rock albums. And it's not me being biased as a fan. You go on any website or any music critic, it's world renowned. Even though it took a year for it to gain recognition, at least here in the United States, Appetite for Destruction from 1987 with Welcome to the Jungle, with Sweet Child of Mine and Paradise City. Everybody knows those songs. I would be shocked, Maria, if you didn't know those songs.
I mean, even I know those songs, and I just asked you what Appetite for Distortion referred to. I mean, as huge fan, as big of rock music fan as I am, I'm not. I haven't listened to Guns N' Roses as much as I should have over the years. And yeah, I really should check out their discography. Uh, I admit it. So yeah, I guess I have some homework to do now.
Well, I mean, Appetite is required, listening like debut albums. It's like that or Van Halen or Boston as far as like greatest rock album debuts, but GNR across the board because we hear those previously mentioned songs everywhere, from grocery stores to sporting events. It's That's why I felt comfortable talking about Guns N' Roses, not just because they're my favorite band. I would say that even though someone like you who hasn't done really much digging in their discography. Sorry, I don't know if that's Amazon. I don't know if that's diapers. Like if we get diaper delivery. Does the microphone pick up on that, by the way? Do you hear that ringing?
No,
All right, so I just
I don't.
pretend that's just of the voices in my head, okay, that are talking to me.
I don't. I don't hear anything.
All right, no, that's good because my son's being well behaved. He's eating strawberries now anyway. So I always use the analogy where you're whether you're like a hardcore fan like myself or Ian, who I started this with, or you're a Girl Scout, trying to think of something that's the opposite of us. You've heard those songs. Sweet Child of Mine has been covered so often by so many different artists. Welcome to the Jungle is used in so many different movies. Same thing with Paradise City. So yeah, take a chance, an opportunity to at least listen to Appetite. But that makes me ask you the question: how come the interest in interviewing me if you're not that diehard into the GNR? I mean, I appreciate it and thank you. I'm not gonna jump off. Don't worry, I'm not leaving. I'm just curious. What intrigued you if you're not a big GNR fan?
Right. Well, the reason why I wanted to interview you is because I have no idea how I came across your page on Instagram. First of all, I mean, I can't remember how I came across your page on Instagram. But after looking at your website, I read that you have interviewed some pretty notable names for your podcast, including Dee Snider, John Densmore, Alice Cooper, and obviously, I was like, if you have interviewed names as big as those, it's like I would love to have you on my show, and I would love to um, have a conversation with you.
Well, I thank you and I appreciate that. And that's kind of almost by design, not only just to get to interview these legends and people who I admire and somehow getting an opportunity to put myself in position to get these interviews, and I'm very grateful because it casts a wider net. If I was just going to interview all Guns N' Roses people, okay, I have my section of fans, but I'm going to get bored. So if I'm going to interview Dee Snider, there's so many things I could talk to him about.
Mhm.
Guns N' Roses is going to be in there somewhere, maybe towards the end, but usually with any of these people, they're coming on to promote something. So Alice Cooper at the time, I think it was Hollywood Vampires or D, because I think he's been on a couple times. It might have been one might have been a graphic novel. I forget what the other one was. So there's always that part of it. But D, I could talk to about horror movies. I could talk about being from Long Island. I could talk about censorship, and it just opens up a wider net. Mental health. I had a great conversation about with D about mental health, and that's kind of like my sub. It's not as advertised. At least it's advertised on the air, but not so much off. Mental health and talking about that because how can you be a Guns N' Roses fan? Because they've all gone through their mental health challenges. So I think that also has allowed me to expand my to get people like you because that's how I translate what I do on the podcast. I say the conversation continues in between the broadcasts on social media. So I try to, well, of course, cater to my Guns N' Roses roots. I like to cast kind of like a wide net using that 6 degrees of GNR bacon to however I got you, whether I'm connecting it to The Simpsons or I'm making some bad, silly meme out of something or, wishing someone else a happy birthday and connecting this artist to Guns N' Roses that you didn't know played with Slash or something like that. I'm always trying to look to, you know, how many ways can I approach this one this one subject? And I've gotten this far.
I see. So just out of curiosity, how did you end up scoring an interview with John Densmore? Say.
Um, I consider myself lucky in this regard, and also at the same time, I have to step back and realize I put myself in the position I was in. So I told you I work for Premier Radio Networks, which is now part of, and it has been for a while, iHeartRadio. And something that we do are called radio tours. If you listen to morning radio, those interviews that they do, they're like 7 minutes, 6 minutes. They're short. They're quick. So we whether it's a musician, whether it's an actor, an author, somebody with something to promote, and we are the professionals of scheduling that for their A&R people, their label to get them a list of our stations we're working with because Premier Radio works with stations, iHeart and beyond, to get them the best markets, to get them the best interviews. And I was such a great experience just to be hired to because I was like just like this morning. Do you know the song? It's the son of Jim Croce, AJ Croce. AJ Croce, Jim Croce is a legendary folk singer. Bad News Brown. It's just like the songs if you heard it. So I'm on Zoom with his son AJ, who's also a musician, and I'm taking him on Zoom or connecting him on phone, my little setup here, to go to talk to different stations around the country. And that's the job. Within 2 hours, it could be between 10 and 20 stations, depending how popular they are. So with that being said, once I started the podcast and started seeing some people that I would love to interview for the podcast, I started. I'm like, you know what, my boss. I was like, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask, but if there's an opportunity here, let me know. The first one I might have asked was, and it didn't work out the first time, but it worked out the second time, and it kind of shows you, was Charlotte and Flair. I don't know if you're a wrestling fan. She is a wrestler. She's the daughter of Ric Flair, very famous. Ric Flair's holds the record for most championships in WWE. Probably going to be broken by John Cena. I know it's very boring.
Oh
I'm
my God.
sorry.
No, no, it's like I know it's technically 10:37 here, but I went to bed at like 2 a.m. last night, and trust me, you aren't boring me. I just haven't gotten enough sleep yet.
I know. That's why I was making fun. I was teasing you because I'm the same way. with my son who literally woke up from the nap. I thought I was going to start the interview with you with him sleeping. He literally woke up as we were about to start. And it's like, I'm exhausted getting him to sleep. It's whatever. So it's sidebar. So it was, I knew Charlotte Flair had a Guns N' Roses connection because she has a tattoo that says "Patience," and it's a Guns N' Roses reference to the song that was in, something for her brother, that because that was their favorite band in song when she got it after he passed away, and I knew the story, and I wanted to get it for myself, and my boss said, you're allowed to ask, but I can't always say yes because it depends upon, supply and demand. Do I have to, which makes sense because who am I with, it's not how he phrases it, but how many listeners, I should literally say it, does my podcast have versus a radio station in this city, in that state? A lot less. So it's not going to be worth it. However, over time, with what I've been able to produce and getting the podcast on the iHeartRadio app because of how it's well produced, I've been told, and getting a good fan base and getting good social media and getting my interviews picked up, it's like okay, well, when it's appropriate, my boss is like, okay, you can take part in this one, knowing that I'm going to do a good job with it. So that happened with Charlotte Flair, maybe like a year after that. So that's the case with John Densmore. John Densmore and Robbie Krieger. I'm just, the Doors are probably my second favorite band, and just lucky that I'm. Those might have been through our classic rock uh, department there, who I've just become. He's the one that helped me. I give him credit every time I talk to him. He's like, yeah, 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 it's all you. He's the one that helped me get the door open for Alice Cooper. So it's just connections from where I am, and there are times I'm like, do I really deserve to be here, because it's not like this person specifically said yes, I'm gonna go talk to Brando. I'm on a list of people, and I'm on a list of people because of, but again, I'm not given anything, and I'll use a fun example. We're doing a tour with Vanilla Ice soon,
Oh, really?
and I was like, I'm sure this is gonna be booked out, but just in case. My boss is like, "Oh, it's so booked." I'm like, "No, say no more. I understand." So it's just like things like that that I'm just lucky. And as I've mentioned before, I get interviews on social media. I get them through connections. Sometimes I get them through things like that. Sometimes I get listeners who reach out to guests for me and get them. So it's like every way possible you can think of how I've gotten a guest. Other than, well, I should say the only one I've paid for was when I donated charity to Ricky Rackman from Headbangers Ball to his Stop Soldier Suicide. I donated to that. He did my podcast. Other than that, I've never paid for an interview.
I see. Well, yeah. Uh, mm, so far, the only way that I've been able to score all of my interview subjects is by reaching out to them on Instagram. And honestly, pretty, I'd say like most of the time it has worked. I mean, I have reached out to plenty of people who haven't responded to me yet. With some of them, they have responded, but it's hmm, kind of it's taken us a long time to actually schedule an interview because there's this one artist who I think that she and I agreed to do an interview maybe at the in the middle of December, like shortly before the holidays, or maybe like 1 month before the winter holidays. But then that got postponed, and I have recently reached out to her, like maybe a week ago, and she was like, "Yeah, I can be available anytime soon," and I gave her some dates that were already like last week, and she still hasn't responded to those yet. So yeah, like it's definitely it's not always easy to score guests because everyone's busy. Not everyone has. Um, I mean, you never know when someone can be available. So
I I know that for far too well, and I'm not making it seem easy because just between us, it was a little back and forth for us to. to make it work. Yes, this is a. He just gave me a juice pouch. Do you want any apple, strawberry, spinach? Do you want any? No, you're okay. Squeeze the bottom. He goes to the top. So funny. And he knows the sign language for more. He learned that from Miss Rachel. I don't
Oh,
know if you're familiar. He's so
how old
smart.
again?
He's gonna. He's. You say how old? Is that what you ask?
Yeah.
He'll be two April 26th. So he's still one.
Wow, oh my gosh.
It's been a crazy ride, and it's been very cool, and it's been put in perspective by some listeners, saying how I started it as I think like as like a 33-year-old single guy living by myself, and just to see me through doing this podcast, because I used a lot of these things to connect to my guests. Honestly, like when I got married, I'm asking Dave Mustaine for marriage advice, and I think they appreciate things like that because they're always getting asked the same question, and I always like to not to say remember me, but just to have like a moment with them. I always strive to make them laugh in some way, but just to have some connection. So now I love talking to guests about their kids. Now it's something I never really asked about before because I had nothing to really, I'm an older brother, but that's not the same. So just to have that is pretty special. I'm sorry, did you ask something about the booking? Yeah, I didn't realize. Well, some have come easy. There's been such a challenge that have come with the double-edged sword of doing a Guns N' Roses themed podcast because there are people that will not do it just because it is a Guns N' Roses themed podcast.
Really?
For a
Um,
variety of reasons. Some people think that I'm just some '80s rocker wanting to talk about Guns N' Roses for an hour. As we've discussed, that's not the case. I mean, I'm a part '80s rocker, but I don't want to talk about GNR for an hour. Only on rare occasions, but that's not what I do episode in and out. There are those who are too close to the situation, who know people like former members usually, or perhaps even current ones that word got back to me once that even though I have interviewed current members on the show, like Dizzy Reed and Richard Fortis and Frank Ferrer, that it was gotten back to me that management wasn't happy with it. And I'm not a salacious guy. I avoid controversy. I do my best to avoid clickbait. I I can't control how other magazines phrase what comes out of it. As long as I'm quoted right, then it's like okay, it is what it is. So with that has become very challenging. But I don't want to say who they are yet because I finally got two yeses from ex members that I
mhm.
thought were never going to come on, like for years. And it's not like I've followed up on them constantly, but every now and then you follow up on them. And there are ones that, yeah, that it does peter off. And then I don't know, it's almost like when you have a crush on somebody and they just ignore you. And it's almost like dating in a way. It really is almost like dating, going after and scheduling things and
Mhm.
no, there have been things that haven't worked out or canceled, but obviously more often than not, thankfully, it has worked in my favor. Sorry, I was trying to communicate with him. See, there's no more in here. Do you want this apple? No, you're. You want pasta? Squeeze, squeeze. Okay, there you go. And just learning to go with it like this. Just being able to do that has been also pretty special. And yeah, recently I had him. It was either my wife take him back to the bedroom screaming, trying to get him to nap, or have him sit in my lap during the interview I recently did with Dorothy Martin.
Mhm.
And he was good. He was fine. It was only 20 minutes. I definitely could not have stretched it any longer. But I'm like, at the end, I'm like, I hope he was okay. He wasn't talking too much. She's like, oh, this is the best interview I've ever done. I should have Harris in every interview. So it's been fun. I want to keep doing it, and he's gonna have a whole catalog later of just rock stars to go back and be like, "How did my dad get that person?" So, and also rock stars saying hi to him. It's cool when certain people say hi to him. It's cute.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, let's the next
Enough
question.
baby talk.
So do you have any advice for beginner podcasters such as myself? Yeah, because lately I noticed that I really need to increase my following. So I have done about 25 or 26 interviews at this point. That's how many I have uploaded to my YouTube channel. And I only have 25 subscribers, most of which I only just got recently. And also, I need to increase the views on my videos. I'm guessing that a huge part of it has something to do with the fact that I need to get into a professional studio, but I don't have the funds for that right now. So I'm going to have to make do with Zoom interviews. But basically, what advice would you give to someone who needs to increase their viewership?
Well, I mean, I would love to hear some advice too, because I would love to increase my viewership, but I appreciate you, indicating that I have a good one, or maybe maybe I do in with social media. Look, that's been part of the challenge, especially when going over to YouTube, because when it's audio, you're focused on one area, and there's so much out there. Uh, Having mine based on something has helped because it's not always okay. I'm gonna interview this person. This person's coming up. I'm doing on this day. I'm talking about in Guns N' Roses. I'm talking, engaging listeners about with trivia or questions about music. So that's helped, but it's been a slow burn. It definitely has been a slow burn to do that. There are moments, ebbs and flows where I get more. It helps to get views, of course, when you get picked up by a news outlet, but that doesn't necessarily it's bank that it's going to get a lot. And there are things it's so random. Like it really is so random. I do a lot of those. I guess there one thing that was given to an advice piece of advice that was given to me uh, would just be to do shorts, those 60-second videos, and that's helped me increase viewership a little bit, and get more views. So those 60-second videos, because I wasn't doing that. I was just doing full interviews and maybe 2-minute clips of like highlights. Just to have because who's going to always going to listen to an hour interviews? But if I have a certain story that's picked up by a news outlet, okay, that would be cool to have separately and link back to the original. So those are things that I do. But the shorts, yeah, just noticing that and being able to put it on multiple platforms like Facebook and even TikTok if you want or Instagram. Those 60 because we live in such a ADD world. 60 seconds. So it's become a new challenge, editing challenge. Look, I don't have anything fancy. I'm talking to you on Zoom right now. I only recently, and I'm not talking to you on it right now, uh, got a new webcam that was only like $50 because I was saying the same thing to myself. Do I need to make this look better? I mean, I have access if I really wanted to professional studios where I work, but you look at today's world, I mean, there are things that look really terrible that do well. I think it's the content and getting it out there and getting and having a content that people want to see, I guess. I'm lucky that maybe since mine is so niche, but at the same time it's niche, but I have this wide net that also like gets people like you that gets, I people always just random just like random things that Guns N' Roses, they'll appear in Cobra Kai on Netflix. And then now I'm able to talk to my listeners like, hey, did you watch that show on Netflix? Yeah, Guns N' Roses was in it, the Sweet Child of Mine. So just opening up, that's helped me do that. Because I had a short-lived, I'll bring it back when my son's old enough. I had a short-lived a horror spin-off, Appetite for Horror. I know not as I don't know, not as romantic as Appetite for Distortion. And distortion just sounds like a radio. To go back to that question, it sounds like it's like a radio term, or also to get rid of the BS that's out there, get distortion. I have an appetite for. I want to get. There's no distortion here. I always try to say that. I want to give you things straight up. I'm wrong a lot. Tell me when I'm wrong, please. But I don't ever lie about it. Where was I? Where was I with this? where was I going with this? Please tell where what were you just talking about us now? This is a lot.
Yeah, basically, you're saying that the most important thing when it comes to viewership is not
Well,
necessarily the the quality of the content, but the content itself. And honestly,
yeah, and I hate saying that. I want you. I take pride in making quality content. You know, I try to have a good backgrounds. I make sure my audio sounds good. I don't want you just to anyone just to put out any piece of garbage out there. But just don't freak out if you don't have the best microphone, if you don't have the best camera. Those are not really going to stop you. Take a step back. Would you listen to what you're hearing? You know, it may not sound like NPR or as crisp, but is it bothering you? Or there hisses? Or there clicks? Is it something really a bother? So I don't think you need to have the best quality equipment to do it, but just find something that you can make a connection with your audience with, because there's just so much out there. So,
um,
period.
well, yeah, honestly, I feel like when it comes to my content, I feel like I have great content because I have been fortunate to interview some pretty big names so far, like Karen Mason Blair. She's famous for being a photographer in the '90s grunge scene. I interviewed Rio Thorogood. Um, who else? Kyle Rising, like a whole um, Sage Germain, a whole bunch of musicians who have a huge following on social media. And honestly, I always like I always come up with great questions. I mean, honestly, I feel like I definitely ask the questions that will create a great conversation. And most importantly, I love the answers that I'm getting because so far when I have a conversation with someone on my show, I always feel like I'm getting great content. Like the answers always provide so much information that is very interesting to me, and I feel like it should be interesting to my viewers as well. But when I check my YouTube channel, like when I check the statistics, well, actually, analytics and stuff. I always see that my viewers don't always watch the whole thing. I mean, I do know that my interviews are kind of long. I always aim for an hour because I feel like less than that is too short, and longer than that is obviously way too long. But I don't know. Maybe I should do like half-hour interviews or something, or maybe like 20 minutes.
Yeah, I've been trying to do that myself. I mean, some of my listeners might notice that some of my episodes have become shorter, that half-hour episodes are.
Mhm.
Also, I mean, something I need to currently look into is timestamps. You know, what subjects are you talking about? Where? So people, if they don't want to sit through the introduction and just get to this point, this topic, you know, like chapters in a book,
Mhm.
uh, you know, that's something that I need to do myself, but that takes time. You know, that takes time. The that as you can see that I and you can hear possibly that I don't have that much time to do that. So shorts will help bring attention to like little commercials for your episodes and your podcast. So you know those can help. But again, it's getting it. It's difficult because I see that not all my listeners want to listen to every guest, and it's not always they listen to the whole thing. But there are those diehards that do. It's just putting out your regular content. You're just being consistent with it, and it is easy to get discouraged, but that's where you have to ask yourself, do I enjoy what I'm doing? And if you enjoy it, you'll keep going. So I enjoy what I do. I'm lucky that this is kind of parallels what I do for a living,
Mhm.
but I don't need to do this, especially now with a kid who like I can barely do this. But I do and I like it, and whatever shekels I make off YouTube and Facebook, great. But I'm not relying on it for his college.
I see. Well, I mean, yeah, I definitely enjoy doing this. And I mean, I've had a passion for rock and roll since I was in my mid 20s. Honestly, even earlier than that, like my early 20s, actually. My mid 20s was when I really started to like discover it again and get into it. And like to this day, I feel like I have. been fortunate to interview so many notable names. Like honestly, it's kind of it's pretty amazing actually. And so yeah, I definitely want to continue doing this. And it's like I said before, just like, and I even asked you before our interview like earlier, like what should I do to, basically increase viewership and then increase followers. Uh, and you said that just like keep going with it.
Keep going with it and just try to create an extension of your podcast on social media, an extension of your personality, really. I I don't want this to become, and I never want it to be the Brando show.
Uh-huh.
That's my radio name. I just wanted to, I always had a duality issue with that. Starting in college, I didn't want to be, every on air radio people always had cool names like Wolfman Jack. I wasn't going to be Brandon Weissler, little Jewish boy from Long Island. I wanted a cool name. So in college, the name only came to me because a friend of mine said it. Now, I just wouldn't have done this. But Brando, he goes, Brando, that rhymes with commando. I'm like, okay, out of nowhere. So I was Brando the Commando in college, and it was like a heavy metal show.
Mhm.
Uh, so that was like, all right, that was my radio name. But when I went professional, I'm like, I can't do the Commando. That's silly. But kept with Brando. Brandon wasn't. I don't know. Brando. Everyone seemed to like Brando wherever I went. Friends or employers, and when I introduced myself as Brandon, but uh, yeah, just to go along again this path of starting college radio to getting the interview. It's tough. It's hard not to get discouraged, but just know there are so many people like you, like me, out there doing this. There's just a lot out there. So it's an extension of yourself, and hopefully, and that's what worried about at first when it was just me, not my coworker, my co-host anymore. Are they really going to like me in what they say and what I say and what I have to offer in addition to the GNR stuff? But I've had listeners say that I I came for Guns N' Roses, but I stayed for you. Or I'm not that big of a Guns N' Roses fan, but I like what you do. Those are the best compliments, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. Mhm.
Yeah, because it's easy. It could be easy to talk about. It's so easy to talk about Guns N' Roses. Um, it also, what does it take? Like what? I'm not in the band. What do I know? I know now just because of all the interviews I've done and some of the relationships I've made. I've known more than I started. But you have to add yourself into there, and are people going to like things about you? So I've always shared things about my mental health journey, my being sober from alcohol for 9 years, going to therapy, talking about myself in addition to is kind of like a foundation to this GNR themed podcast. So, and then now with the kid, I mean, it's funny. I posted a video of, and this wasn't my idea. When my wife and I were married, her sister married us, and she married us to Guns N' Roses lyrics to the song called "This I Love" from Chinese Democracy. And I was like, all right, you know what? Let me share this with my audience. And they appreciated that. I'm like, oh, I got married to Guns N' Roses too. Oh, we walked down the aisle to November Rain. Oh, we walked down the aisle to Patience. So you're making different kind of connections with your audience. So just that's what you want to do in addition to the interviews. Because I do interviews too, and some of them like, wow, that really didn't hit. Like, why? Like, this is like a big name. People should care about this.
Mhm.
It could be a combination of things. Either people don't see it, people don't might not care for that particular episode. There's so many variables, so just try not to get stuck on one thing. As long as you're enjoying it.
I see. Well, yeah, that's definitely really good advice. And yeah, like I can honestly say that I do enjoy what I do. I do enjoy having conversations that I have with my guests. And I definitely want to continue going with this to see how far I can take it.
That's it. It's just to see how far you can take it, and you know what? Again, that's what the podcast world has shown. Why you didn't believe in it, or I didn't believe in it at first, and then you don't know where it could go. But I think it's almost like I've never been in a band, but it's almost like being in a band. It's like you're not going to make money off it. People might not notice you, but you're doing it. You're doing radio right now, whether people like it or not, because a lot of our favorite bands played in front of 5 people at one point. It just takes time. I mentioned Guns N' Roses, that Appetite for Destruction album, which has sold God knows how many millions of records worldwide. It took a year for people to notice it, and it almost completely fell off. It wasn't one of their A&R people had to beg for the Welcome to the Jungle video to be played on MTV at 2 in the morning.
Oh.
Their manager had to beg for money for a video for Sweet Child of Mine, and it's the rest is history. So it's the right break, it's the right time, and I'm still looking for. I'll do interviews like this, so maybe I'm getting a little taste of my own medicine, where I'll interview people who I consider successful, and they're like, okay, let's define success. Am I Guns N' Roses successful? No, but do I have this? Yes, yes, I have this. So maybe that's how I am now. Maybe I'm successful to other people, but there's still there's a lot to accomplish, and I still find myself getting frustrated. But thankfully, I enjoy what I do. I look forward to being on social media with my, posting something every day, even if I don't have it. Try to do an episode a week, but even when I don't have an episode, I'm doing something.
I see. Yeah, well, that's definitely really good advice, and I'm gonna stick to that.
All right, good.
So we've been at this for almost an hour, for like 57 minutes to be exact, and I say we stop right here and we pick it up next time.
Yeah, next time you want to do this again, we can do this again.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, because I still have some more questions left to ask you.
I mean, anyone like that's glaring that well, you got me, because we know it was hard the first time around, and we're lucky my son only cried a little bit in the background.
Yeah, well, honestly, I mean, other than the fact that I have to get up at 10 a.m., which is a bit too early for me these days, I mean, I don't really have a problem with it. So, I mean, yeah, I'd say other like this went pretty smoothly. So, yeah, I would definitely love to do this again.
All right, cool. Yeah, I just let me know, and we'll figure it out. In the meantime, if people want to check out my stuff, the easiest one-stop shop is afdpod.com for Appetite for Distortion podcast. Obviously, just so afdpod.com. There's, my YouTube stuff up there on my social media connections. I put up, a picture of the day and clip of the week. Try to keep it updated daily, at least with something. So that's how, if people want to stay in touch, whether they like Guns N' Roses or maybe not, maybe they find hey, I interviewed Pauly Shore and Tom Green and just random people, or Pollyanna McIntosh from The Walking Dead. So you never know. Maybe you'll find a guest that you like, even if you don't like GNR as much as I do.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Brandon, and I will definitely see you next time. And everyone, please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you think of this episode, and I'll see you all next time.
Thanks, Maria.
Thanks, Brandon. Bye.
Bye.